Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be my October wrap-up. Now for the month of October, I feel like I had a pretty solid reading month. I read a total of 9 books, which is not bad. I continued and finished up some series I was working on. I read some books on my TBR. I absolutely got distracted from my TBR, so we have quite a bit of things to talk about today. I do want to note it's rather dark and gloomy outside, so I apologize for the lighting, but it's simply been raining every day, which I'm honestly been pretty excited about, I'm not gonna lie. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into my wrap-up. The first book I completed for the month of October was one of my most anticipated releases for the month, and that is Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. To say I was excited to pick up Cassandra Clare's adult fantasy debut, her first work I feel like I've ever read outside of the Shadowhunter world, is an understatement. I was pumped for this. This book is set in the fantasy fictional world of Castellan, which is a very powerful, very, very rich, small sort of cityscape setting. Here, royals sort of rule the day. They're constantly seeking their next thrill and are very easily bored by all their wealth and excess, if you will, obviously living beyond the means of a typical person living in this city. In this book, we are reading from our two primary point of views. The first is Kel, and he is known as a sword catcher. Basically, since a young age, he has been trained to look and act exactly like the prince so he can stand in for the prince in various political scenarios and be, as his name describes, a sword catcher, to basically die for the prince. He is really close with the prince, they're best friends, but he's also his bodyguard, and he's been trained his whole life to die for him. Obviously, this creates a rather complicated relationship at play. The other main character we follow is Lynn, and she is part of a cultural and religious group that has access to magic. In this world, all magic has disappeared except the magic that is accessible by Lynn's people, and this magic allows them to be excellent healers and also create charms and various things which they sell, but because they're the only group that has access to magic, they are often treated terribly with suspicion. They have their own laws, they have their own set of conduct, they have to live separately from everyone else. Obviously, this impacts Lynn in every way, shape, and form. These two characters live very separate and different lives, but due to a variety of circumstances, they do begin to cross with one another. And I have to say, I loved every single second of reading this book. First and foremost, I really enjoyed the setting. Not only the sort of city setting, which I felt like rooted the book and story so well and also kept everything sort of contained in one area, but the politics of this world were great too. Because this is a very trade-focused city, it creates a really multifaceted political situation. First and foremost, this city does not rely on things like natural resources or warfare to maintain its power, but instead like trade agreements. This also creates a scenario where the prince and king are powerful, but they also have to have very tenuous relationships with other powerful families in this kingdom because they control other areas of trade, which I loved to read and experience, meaning like the balance of power is really precarious, and you really began to see how that played out within this first installment. I really loved Kel and Lynn as our main characters. They had very separate storylines, which I appreciated and allowed them to really be their own character first and foremost, and when they did cross paths, I really enjoyed the development of their relationship. This series, though, has so many characters to fall in love with. I'm curious if Cassandra Clare is going to create a larger cast of POV point of views that we get to read from. I honestly hope so. I also feel like this was paced so well. It was definitely a slow burn in terms of plot and relationships. I am very clearly anticipating romance within this series, but I can't say between who and how those relationships are going to end up, which is spectacular. Perfect balance of intrigue and world building and all of the inputs I love so much. I also feel like Cassandra Clare's writing strengths really shined in this, but this felt completely different than anything else I've ever really read from her before. Again, I can't emphasize enough like how well paced this book was, particularly in the relationships. I'm on the edge of my seat. I'd honestly give this like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I completed was a carryover from the previous month, and that was Wraith by John Gwynne. I have gone on a bit of a John Gwynne bender. In the past 6 weeks, I have read the entirety of The Faithful and the Fallen, and I've basically documented that entire process across my YouTube channel because I had a bit of a moment with this. I became very obsessed very quickly and could not put this series down, and this month I was able to finish out the series by completing the 4th and final book. Obviously, I have said a lot of really positive things about this series. I've really enjoyed the first 3 books, and for the most part, I would say I liked the 4th one. I didn't love it, which is a little disappointing to say, but I do want to caution I think for 95% of the people who have read the first 3 books and enjoyed them, you would like this fourth and final installment. I think it had more to do with me than the book itself, if that makes sense, but let's backtrack a bit. The Faithful and the Fallen series is a huge multi-POV fantasy experience. Basically, we're introduced to a large cast of characters, both good and evil, and throughout the entire series, we're either leading up to or experiencing this sort of end of the world scrimmage between good versus evil. Throughout the course of the entire series, you see characters grow and change, not only in how they view themselves, but how they interact in this world. You see characters make connections. You see characters travel all around this landscape. It has so many different types of battle sequences and scenes, as well as lots of different military strategy, which John Gwynne is known for. You see and get to experience a lot of beloved fantasy tropes, particularly like the chosen one trope, I would say most predominantly. There's prophecy, there's friendship, there's adventuring, there's tears, there's frustration. There's so much to see and experience within this series. As I mentioned, I really loved the first 3 books quite a bit. The first one is a lot slower, really about kind of setting the board and introducing us to this world, but books 2 and 3 completely took over my life. They were so action-packed and so unpredictable, and I was just hooked to what John Gwynne was doing. When it came to the fourth and final installment though, for the first 50%, I would say I enjoyed this book. But by the end, I found that I maybe was a bit fatigued by how John Gwynne wrote his plotting. I was so constantly taken by surprise in the first part of the series that when it became a bit more predictable at the end, I was just kind of pulled out of the story. And I will say, the last thing I'll mention is, for the most part, I would say this series definitely has a very endearing, but often kind of cheesy way that John Gwynne approaches his characterization. I kind of either looked past it or it didn't bother me as much in the first few installments, but I think because this was kind of like a finale novel, by the time we got towards the final act of this book, I felt like the characters I'd once loved so much just kind of lost their depth to them and kind of felt more like caricatures of the characters I once really appreciated. Kind of like fan service, if I'm being honest. Like, they were just so good, they were so perfect, they were so brave that it just kind of pulled me out of the story a bit. I don't know, I'm kind of 2 minds about this book. I enjoyed it, I liked how it ended. Obviously John Gwynne's military writing continued to shine in this, but by the end of this series, I felt like it just lost some of its charm for me and sort of the unexpectedness and the grittiness that I thought it had in the first few installments, and just kind of was a little too over the top in its truth and courage. You know what I mean? Again, I feel like I'm very much on an island with this opinion. If you really like the first, second, or third book, you're probably gonna like this final installment, but I would probably give Wraith a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I completed for the month of October was The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. I was so excited about this release in the month of October because I read The Spells for Forgetting in August and really liked it. I feel like Adrienne Young is so skilled at creating a heavy atmosphere and ambiance that fit perfectly within the fall season, and I also feel like she always has a dash, or maybe more than a dash, of melodrama to her books that also make them page turners, if I'm being honest. So obviously with this new release, I knew I was going to pick it up right away. But this book is set in a small town in Jasper, North Carolina. Here we're introduced to our main character June, and she has lived her entire life working and living on her family's flower farm. However though, June and her family are cursed. Basically every woman in June's family line basically deal with a situation where at some point in their life, it could happen when they're young or it could wait until they're very old, they basically begin to lose their sense of reality and slowly begin to lose their mind. And June herself is no stranger to sorrow, as she lost her mother at a very young age, as she just disappeared without a trace. And at the beginning of this story, now in her early 30s, she's dealing with the loss of her grandmother, who basically raised her and who she was really, really close to. At the beginning of this book, she decides that she is going to try to solve and cure this curse, which has been impacting her family line again for generations. And from there, we follow June Farrow as she goes on an unexpected journey. This book is honestly a ride, and I actually feel like it's best to know as little as possible going into it. So what I will say about this is I really enjoyed, again, the writing style and the small town ambiance, which really shines within this book. Adrienne Young is really fantastic at creating these small town settings, and the politics and the drama that comes along with living in a small town, as well as the coziness. All of this bleeds into and also impacts her narratives fantastically. I also really appreciated how June rooted this story. Obviously, trying to solve this mystery is something that will grip you kind of immediately. June as a main character is just someone you have a lot of empathy for. Obviously, she's processing the trauma of losing her grandmother, her own mother, and also she's mourning her own life already, as she's fearful of losing her own mind, which she knows ultimately is going to happen one day. This book, I will say, has quite a few unexpected twists and turns. I really like its discussion on family and legacy. I also appreciated that it had some romance sprinkled in there. My only major complaint is that I actually really liked all of the ideas. It's more so that I just wanted more fleshing out of these ideas, more time spent, particularly in the middle of the story, kind of developing this sort of, let's just say, space and time and relationships that we're sort of introduced to, because I think the concepts were strong. The idea was great. I just wanted like more time spent in it, so it had a larger impact, like emotionally for me. And I would give this book like a 3.75, 4 stars. The next book I completed was The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This was my IRL book club pick, so I had to read it this month to discuss with my friends. And honestly, I did have a lot of thoughts about this book. This was actually my first Riley Sager encounter. I had never read a book by him before, and let's just say I have some opinions about his plot structure, so let's just dive in. So going into this book, this is a gothic horror thriller story, so I actually had really high hopes and was excited by the synopsis. This book is set in a small town in Maine, and basically in the 20s there was this horrible murder that happened at this very fancy house where everyone in the family died brutally except the daughter. And ever since that day, everyone in the town and the world thought the daughter did it, and she's also been confined to the house ever since. Fast forward to the 80s, we follow our main character, who is a caregiver, and she's basically been assigned to work at this house called Hope's End and be the caregiver to this last remaining member of this family, and her name is Lenora. Our main character is concerned. Obviously, she's not too excited about this assignment. It's really creepy, and she arrives at this house, which is very dilapidated. It seems mysterious. The people who work there are very strange, and also the previous caregiver is like nowhere to be seen. And when she begins to take care of Lenora, she lets her know that she will tell her the real true story. So from there, we begin to jump forward and back in time as Lenora begins to tell our main character what really happened that fateful night in the 20s, and that begins to parallel the experience of present day. So here's the thing about this book. A lot of it I actually really enjoyed. The writing style is nothing I'd necessarily write home about, but the setting and the concept, creepy, crumbling manner of once a super wealthy family, which is now in ruin, I enjoyed. I liked learning about all the different quirks and personalities of the staff that still remain there and work there. And I also appreciated from a narrative point of view that the mystery is sort of told to us out of order and we're jumping forward and back in time. And I will say there's lots of mini reveals along the way in this book, which will really grip you. I feel like it really leaned into its gothic horror influence quite successfully in the first 2/3 of the book. Here's the deal. At the end though, and I will say apparently this is very typical of Riley Sager's style, there was just so much that happened. It was like, and then, like there were so many twists in the last chunk of this book. It was really hard for me to take like any of the twists seriously, and I just wish more time was spent developing those reveals so they didn't feel so random to me. You know what I mean? Riley Sager is super popular, and I think if you like his style, you would definitely like this book. And I feel like there were some strengths to this book. It was creepy, it was interesting. Again, the mystery of this murder and all of that. But if you've read Riley Sager books and you don't really like his sort of reveal structure, you might not like this. That's kind of what I would say. I didn't hate this book, but I also didn't love this book. I think I'd give it like 3 stars. After I read The Only One Left, I was sort of craving something I knew I was really gonna like and would also really like impact me in an emotional way and just would have beautiful writing, all of that. So I decided to pick up How High We Go in the Dark by Sugoya Nagamatsu. I was recommended this book by numerous friends and told I would really like it, and guess what? They were right. This is a literary fiction work that is more so I would almost describe as like a collection of short stories, but there is sort of a narrative thread that connects everything together in this one cohesive picture. I will say this is a pandemic work of fiction and heavily centers on a pandemic, so I definitely want to call that out. This book will make you think. I feel like it'll rip out your heart. It'll make you question and applaud humanity in like so many different directions. It's a really fascinating contemplation on society and what happens when the world almost ends and death becomes so regular. Basically, this book opens on the first short story, which is a father who is grieving the recent loss of his daughter, who died on an expedition in the Arctic Circle while conducting her research. He decides to travel there as he's also a lauded archaeologist to kind of carry on and continue her work, but also try to discover like what she was thinking and doing in her final moments. And when he arrives, he discovers underneath the melting permafrost, there is a body of a young child from thousands of years prior, and within her there is a contagion that kind of begins to spread across the entire world. From that story, we follow another story and we continue to progress into the future, seeing from so many different angles how this illness has impacted people on the individual level and also collectively as a society. It's a really interesting work contemplating so many different aspects of humanity and some of his ideas and predictions and the direction that humanity will go and travel in as a response to this is both horrifying and fascinating to read and experience. But I also felt like there was this overwhelming sense of perseverance across humanity as well. I really liked this book. I would recommend this book. It is emotional for a huge variety of reasons, but it was definitely worth a read for me, and I'd give it like a 4.25 out of 5 stars. The next book I completed, I for some reason cannot find my finished copy of, but it is God Killer by Hannah Kaner. I had such high expectations for this book going into it because just based on what people were saying, I felt like it was something I would really enjoy, and I'm happy to report I did. I would describe this book as a quest-centered story filled with unlikely companions as they begin to grow, trust, and love one another. It's very like found family set in a very complex and dark fantasy world. It has fantasy world building, but the focus is more on the relationship and how the fantasy world is impacting our main characters on like a specific level, which I appreciated. But this book first introduces us to our first main character, which is named Kissian, and she is a god killer. In this world, there are basically gods for anything and everything. Big, powerful, old gods to small, very local gods as well. Due to a conflict that happened before the start of this novel, gods have basically been outlawed or removed from society, which is creating a lot of complicated things. But for Kissian, it's great for business because again, she is a god killer and she likes it. At the beginning of this book, she is propositioned by our other main character, which is a young noble girl who basically somehow has become attached to a small god of white lies, and they are very close. They trust and love each other very much, but they want to go on a journey to figure out how they can become separated. And Kissian, one of our main characters, sort of begrudgingly agrees. Along the way, they run into a disgruntled knight who's also going on a quest to the same city that they're traveling to. And again, along the way, these characters begin to trust, know, and work together to sort of survive this perilous quest and journey. Also along the way, more magic and details of this world are slowly revealed. And I have to say, overall, I really enjoyed this novel. I just feel like the inputs worked quite well. First, I really appreciated the fantasy setting, where once humans and gods lived sort of alongside one another, and now gods have been entirely removed. And you kind of see the impact of this decision not only throughout the story, but also through the different perspectives of the characters we follow. I really enjoyed the quest structure of this book, traveling through different landscapes and lands, overcoming various trials and tribulations, and the characters themselves rooted this book so well. Everyone was looking for family in one way or another. Everyone was very lonely in their own way, and this sort of unlikely group going on this quest was truly a delight to read in my opinion. And overall, I sort of appreciated the author's methodical pacing. I feel like she achieved a lot of world building and like not a lot of space. This book is not very long at all. You do sort of have to pay attention to every word that's written. And I do think it could read slow depending on your own like preferences when it comes to fantasy, but I personally enjoyed it quite a bit, and I would give it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I completed was another very anticipated release and overall just like a very popular read at the moment, and that is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed. This is described as like fae meets academic rivals to lovers meets light academia, and all of those inputs sounded rather intriguing to me. And while I didn't love the other book I read by this author, I did really love her writing style, so I was looking forward to picking this book up. And this book is set in a world that I would say is a really interesting mix of like historical fiction and fantasy. It almost feels like a real place, like a real historical setting, but just with magic, but it's definitely not. I feel like the landscape the author creates for this book to take place in worked so well. In this book, we're introduced to our first main character, and her name is Effie. And Effie has always believed in fairy tales. She's always sort of had to, because she has been haunted by dreams of the fairy king her entire life, and no one has ever believed her that what she is seeing or dreaming is real, and she has kind of been put down her entire life because of this. Effie, at the beginning of the story, is a young woman now attending university, and transparently, she is struggling badly due to some events that occurred on campus. And I do want to say a trigger warning for assault. At the beginning of this book, she sees an opportunity to sort of leave university and tackle a project she will have a lot of passion with, because the estate of her favorite author is looking for an architect student to come to basically rebuild it and design it based on his legacy. And there she travels to this faraway estate and begins to get enthralled in the mystery of this place. And she also meets another student who's living there, sort of investigating the legacy of the author who once lived here as well. Both of these characters kind of have a rocky start with one another, but they begin to work together, and they also work to try to save one another as the magic and danger of this place begins to swell. First and foremost, this is really Effie's story. Character arc is both difficult and beautiful to read, but I feel like that journey that we go on with Effie throughout this entire story is like the best part of this book. I also really enjoyed the relationship and romantic element of the story, seeing her endear to a character who believes her, is interested in her, cares about her mind, thoughts, and feelings was obviously very refreshing for her, but also just kind of delightful to read and see within a story and narrative. But I think what truly shined outside of Effie's character was the setting of this book, this faraway, crumbling estate, this strange and dark mystery that surrounds Effie and this place, this sort of fae magic and sort of very nature-focused reality of this story was so dreamy and mysterious and dark and a little bit violent. I love sort of cracking the code of what actually went on in this book, and I would say 90% of the story I really loved. I will say the reveals and perhaps a bit of the end felt a little too on the nose for me, but I can also see and respect the choice, but it just didn't perfectly work for me. There is a vagueness and just a beauty to the writing style and the quality of the story that I felt like worked so well, and for the most part I really did enjoy this book, and I would give it a 4 out of 5 stars. Alrighty, I promise we are in the home stretch. I have 2 more books to chat about. The first is Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. I clearly could not stop reading books about crumbling old estates that appear haunted and have a lot of mystery surrounding them, because I read another gothic horror story, but this book is set in Eden, Kentucky, a small, nowhere town that our main character lives in with her brother. And the only interesting thing about this town is that there's this very strange house that no one locally ever goes to called the Starling House. Everyone thinks it's haunted or just the source of all bad luck that is fallen this town. And this house was once the home to a very famous author who has since passed away, and now like various caretakers come in and out sort of caring for the property. In this book we're introduced to our main character named Opal, and Opal is a lot of things: a high school dropout, a thief, a scammer, basically someone who will do anything to provide for her younger brother Jasper and get him out of this no good town. And at the beginning of this book, Opal is presented a very strange opportunity of employment to basically clean and work at the Starling House. And when she does, she begins to be plagued with dreams, also get wrapped up into the history and the past of this house and this place, and also get to know the caretaker that lives there. I have to say, I really enjoyed the story. Obviously, it has this lyrical, mysterious, sort of magical quality to it, especially as it relates to the Starling House, the mystery of this house, and like what it means for our characters and the town itself. But I really thought the narrative structure of this book was very, very sharp. And I think a lot of that has to do with Opal. She is a main character was just really interesting to read from. She has this one-mindedness, determination to try to save her brother from this no-good town. And the situations that she will put herself in to try to achieve this are oftentimes very, very scary, but it shows her utter desperation, which is it's supposed to. I also feel like the author really captured this small town southern setting too, and really put that as a very central part of this story and experience. Not only the suspicion, the gossip that exists within this town, but also the legacy and history that is constantly trying to be rewritten or forgotten about, but also how small towns can be vulnerable, especially in regards to wealth disparity and people who are trying to siphon and take advantage of them too, which is definitely part of this book. But overall, I really appreciated the character arc and growth of Opal, our main character, her love for her brother, learning about her family life and history, and also the development of the relationship between her and the guardian of Starling House, which was honestly, the magical component of this book was also so good. I just feel like all of the inputs of the story worked really, really well for me. And again, as a strange, mysterious, magical, gothic horror story, which I read many this month, I think this was one of my favorites, and I would give this like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And the last book I was able to complete for the month of October was Keeper of Enchanted Rooms by Charlie N. Holmberg. I wanted to read something a little cozy, a little endearing, a little romantic, especially because I did read quite a few dark books this past month, and this book is set in the 1850s difficulties, and we're introduced to one of our two main characters. The first is Merritt, and Merritt at the beginning of the story has inherited unexpectedly a home, but when he travels there, excited to live there and kind of embark on a new life, he realizes that this home is enchanted and kind of haunted and trying to destroy and kill him basically upon arrival. Therefore, he enlists the help of an individual from the Boston Institute of Enchanted Rooms, which is our other main character, and her name is Hulda, and she is not only trained in helping to tame these enchanted homes, but she also loves magic, and she loves magical homes too. They begin to work together to try to make this place kind of settle down and try to figure out what is the root of what is going on. You see them get closer, you see other individuals enter their lives. This book is all about found family, love, second chances, and also magic. There's sort of a magical mystery over the course of this book that was unexpected but worked quite well for me, and I think balanced out the otherwise like very cozy and endearing moments. I really appreciated that this book was literally about making a place your home and like finding a place for yourself in the world, and I really appreciated all of the magic and lore of the magic and just this like enchanting home to begin with. I appreciated the pacing of the relationships in this book, and overall it really just delivered exactly what I was wanting, which was a cozy, romantic, and endearing story which would put a smile on my face. It wasn't mind-boggling, but it was so stinking cute, and I can see why this book was really, really popular because it was just such a joy to read. And honestly, I'd give it like a 4.25 out of 5 stars. I read it very, very quickly. Alrighty guys, those are all the books I read for the month of October. Please let me know down below some books you've read recently, as I would love to know, and I will see you soon with another video soon. Goodbye!